Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be stepping into a pretty sensitive chapter of history. We're taking you on a deep dive into the story of one family and how it tragically intersects with the Nazi era.
We're focusing on Herdorf, Germany,
Okay.
small town, with a mining history. Seemingly ordinary, but like so many places in Germany, it holds a darker past beneath the surface.
Right. And we uncover this past through the Stolpersteine project.
Right.
You've probably heard of these.
Yeah.
They're those small brass memorials embedded in sidewalks, each one marking the last known residence of a victim of Nazi persecution.
It's a really powerful project.
Absolutely.
And it leads us to the Dendel family,
Okay.
whose story offers a really powerful lens through which we can understand the horrors of the Nazi euthanasia program.
Yeah.
It's a program that unfortunately many people don't know a lot about.
It's easy to get lost in the sheer scale of the Holocaust. But these individual stories, like the Dendels, really drive home the devastating human cost. So what do we know about life in Herdorf back in the early 1900s when the Dendel story begins?
Well, our sources, a fascinating mix of research papers, press releases about the Stolpersteine project, and even local news articles, paint a picture of a typical, working class town. Alois Dendel, the patriarch, he was a miner like many others in the area. He was even part of a group who ventured all the way to the Tsumeb mine in German colonial Southwest Africa.
That's quite a journey.
Yeah.
It speaks to a sense of adventure, a desire for opportunity, even amidst the hardships of that time.
Indeed. But like many stories from this era, Alois's life was marked by tragedy. His wife, Helena, died in 1929. He later remarried a woman named Clara Wirtz, whose own family would later become entangled in the unfolding tragedy.
It's almost like foreshadowing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
A hint that this darkness is going to spread outward, affecting more than just Ellis and his immediate family.
Exactly. And one of the first disturbing details we encounter in the sources is that all 7 of Alois' children were documented as having intellectual disabilities.
Oh, wow.
The term used at the time was angeborener Schwachsinn, which translates to congenital feeble-mindedness.
That language alone is so chilling.
Right.
So dehumanizing.
Right.
It's clear how this kind of labeling laid the groundwork for the Nazi ideology to come.
You hit the nail on the head. That seemingly clinical term reflected a deep-seated prejudice aligning with that broader context of eugenics and scientific racism prevalent at the time.
Right.
It categorized these individuals as inherently flawed, justifying their exclusion and ultimately their extermination.
So we have this seemingly ordinary family in an ordinary town, but already we see the cracks, the vulnerabilities that the Nazi regime would exploit.
Yeah.
And as we move on, we'll see how those cracks widen as Germany takes a truly dark turn.
Definitely. So in the previous part, we introduced the Dendel family from Herdorf, and we began to uncover the unsettling context of the early 20th century, a time when eugenics and scientific racism were gaining traction.
Yeah, it's hard to grasp how quickly things escalated in Germany, moving from these troubling ideas to actual policies of exclusion and ultimately extermination.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It was a chillingly swift progression.
Yeah.
And as we move into the 1930s, the Dendel family, like so many others, found themselves swept up in this rapidly changing and increasingly hostile environment.
And we see the family starting to be fractured even before the Nazis take power.
Right.
In 1931, the family relocates to Wetzlar, but Martha, the oldest daughter, is already living in the HHStAW house, a home for girls and women with disabilities.
This institutionalization was already a common practice. But with the Nazi rise to power in 1933, the entire framework for understanding and treating disability took a sinister turn.
The sources highlight a pivotal turning point. The 1933 law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring. This law on the surface seemed to be about public health.
Right.
But in reality, it was something far more sinister.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This law was a key instrument in the Nazis' horrific plan to purify the German gene pool.
Oh, wow.
It led to the forced sterilization of hundreds of thousands of individuals deemed unfit.
Right.
Including, as we'll see, some of the Dendel children.
So science was being twisted, manipulated to serve this horrific agenda.
Absolutely.
They created this facade of legitimacy, but it was really about controlling who could reproduce. who was deemed worthy of life.
And the outbreak of World War II in 1939 only intensified this focus on eliminating those considered burdens on society.
Right.
Resources were scarce, and the Nazi propaganda machine effectively painted people with disabilities as useless eaters, a drain on the war effort.
This shift in rhetoric is so disturbing.
Yeah.
It's almost as if war provided a convenient cover for escalating these already discriminatory policies, allowing them to move from sterilization to outright murder.
And that's precisely when Aktion T4 emerges. It's
Right.
a program shrouded in secrecy designed to systematically murder those deemed unworthy of life.
We often associate the Holocaust with gas chambers.
Yeah.
But Aktion T4 employed a chillingly diverse array of killing methods.
You're right to point that out.
Yeah.
The methods were horrifyingly varied and often disguised as medical care.
Right.
Deliberate starvation was rampant, lethal injections were used, and medical neglect was widespread.
And tragically, the Dendel family found themselves right in the crosshairs of this machinery of death.
Yes. In 1934, just a year after the Nazis came to power, Alois Dendel passed away.
Okay.
His widow, Clara, returned to Herdorf with their son, Alois Jr., leaving the 4 daughters from Alois's first marriage in an institution in Wetzlar.
It's a heartbreaking separation and a pivotal moment in the story.
Yeah.
Because these institutions, initially intended for care, became way stations on the path to extermination.
Exactly. Expert panels operating within this bureaucratic system decided who would live and who would die. Often their assessments were based on flimsy evidence, arbitrary criteria, rooted in the twisted logic of Nazi ideology.
And the families of these victims, were they aware of what was happening?
Families were often deliberately kept in the dark. They were given false causes of death.
Oh, wow.
Heart failure, pneumonia, anything to cover up the truth.
Right.
The sheer scale and calculated nature of this deception is almost unfathomable.
It's like a well-oiled machine churning through human lives, reducing them to files and statistics, efficiently erasing their existence.
And one of the key gears in this horrifying machine was Hadamar, the killing center closest to Herdorf,
Right.
which tragically became the final destination for some of the Dendel sisters.
Hadamar casts a long shadow over this entire story, and in the next part we'll delve into the specific fates of each Dendel child, confronting the brutal reality of how this program tore families apart and extinguished innocent lives.
Yeah.
We've been exploring the chilling story of the Dendel family from Herdorf, a story tragically intertwined with the Nazi euthanasia program. Now we're going to focus on the individual fates of each child, confronting the full weight of what this program wrought.
It's essential to remember that each of these children was a unique individual with hopes and dreams, loves and losses, and those lives, those stories were brutally cut short by a regime that saw them as nothing more than a burden to be eliminated.
We know that the 4 daughters from Alois' first marriage were left in an institution when their father passed away and their stepmother returned to Herdorf. Let's start with the eldest, Martha, who had already been placed in the HHStAW before the family moved to Wetzlar.
Martha's story is sadly typical of what happened to so many in those institutions. In 1943, she was transported from the HHStAW to Klagenfurt, Austria. It was there that she was murdered by a lethal injection.
It's hard to even imagine the fear, the confusion she must have felt being moved from place to place, ultimately to her death. And to think this was all done under the guise of care.
What's particularly disturbing is the testimony we have from the post-war Niedermoser trial.
Right.
It reveals the cold bureaucratic efficiency with which these killings were carried out. The perpetrators spoke of their actions in a matter-of-fact way, devoid of any remorse, as if they were simply following orders, completing a task.
It speaks to the insidious nature of this ideology, how it could strip away the humanity of the victims and the perpetrators alike.
And sadly, Martha's fate was shared by many others, including her sister Paula.
What happened to Paula?
Paula was subjected to forced sterilization. Later, she was transferred to Eichberg, where she died in 1940. The official cause of death was general heart weakness, a common euphemism used to cover up the killings.
These institutions meant to be havens became death traps. It's a cruel and devastating betrayal.
Absolutely, and this system wasn't just about murder, it also sought to control reproduction. Their brother Ernst was also sterilized, though thankfully he survived. Later, he filed for compensation, a common but usually futile attempt to seek some kind of justice, some acknowledgement of the horrific violation he endured.
Even survival came at a terrible price. The trauma, The physical and psychological scars would have lingered long after the war ended.
Exactly. And then there's Ferdinand, their other brother. He seemingly avoided sterilization, went on to marry, and even had a daughter.
Wow.
It's a glimmer of hope amidst all the darkness, and it raises an important question. Did having a family appearing more integrated into society offer some degree of protection from the program?
It's certainly possible, perhaps, having a family made individuals seem more useful in the eyes of the regime.
It's a thought-provoking observation, unfortunately. Johanna, another of the Dendel sisters, did not have the same outcome. She was sterilized and moved between various institutions before finally being murdered at Hadamar in 1944.
Her story illustrates how systematic and relentless this program was. It wasn't random. It was a calculated bureaucratic process designed to identify, segregate, and ultimately eliminate those deemed unfit.
Then there's Mathilde. Her story is one of those that leaves us with more questions than answers. She gave birth in 1946 to a son who died soon after being discharged. Her trail goes cold.
It's a stark reminder that for many families, the search for answers for closure continues to this day. Some stories remain fragmented, lost in the chaos and brutality of that era.
And finally, there's Maria, the youngest of the daughters. She was murdered at Hadamar during Aktion T4 in 1941. She was just 17 years old.
Another life cut short. Another family shattered. And what about Alois Jr., the son from Alois Dendel's second marriage?
Alois Jr. did survive, though. Eyewitness accounts suggest he may have been sterilized as a teenager. He lived a long life in Herdorf, dying in 2010.
Out of 9 children, only 3 survived, and their survival was marked by profound loss and unimaginable trauma. The Dendel family's story, though unique in its details, reflects the suffering of countless others across Germany and occupied territories.
It's crucial to remember that the impact of Aktion T4 went far beyond the immediate victims. It shattered families, terrorized entire communities, and left behind a legacy of pain and silence that continues to echo through generations.
And we must also acknowledge those from Herdorf, beyond the Dendel family, whose lives were stolen by this program. There was August Clemens Huhn, also murdered at Hadamar, and Johanna Eichhoff, the sister of Alois Dendel's second wife, Clara. She, too, was murdered at Hadamar.
Their stories underscore the interconnectedness of these tragedies, how this web of suffering stretched across the entire community.
And there's Marie Daub, who died at Kaufbeuren from deliberate starvation. Her death after Aktion T4 was officially halted in 1941 highlights the insidious nature of this ideology, how it could shift and adapt, finding new ways to manifest its cruelty.
Marie's death is a chilling example of what historians call decentralized euthanasia, after public outcry led to the official end of Aktion T4. The killing methods became more diffuse, hidden behind medical diagnoses and bureaucratic procedures. It shows how dangerous ideologies can persist even when they are forced underground.
It's a stark reminder that we must remain vigilant against all forms of discrimination and exclusion. The seeds of hatred can easily take root if we are not careful.
And that's why remembrance is so crucial. Projects like Stolpersteine. These small memorials embedded in the sidewalks are vital. They serve as tangible reminders of the individuals who were lost, ensuring they are not erased from history.
They force us to confront the past, to acknowledge the human cost of indifference and complicity. These memorials are not just about the past. They are a call to action in the present.
By learning about these individual stories, by engaging with this difficult history, we can start to understand the dangers of prejudice and the importance of protecting the rights of all people.
We've delved into a dark chapter of history today, but these stories, however painful, are essential. They remind us that even in seemingly ordinary towns like Herdorf, the shadows of the past linger. It's up to us to shed light on those shadows, to learn from them, and to ensure that such horrors never happen again.
The Dendel family's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of human rights and the devastating consequences of unchecked prejudice. What forms of exclusion and discrimination still exist today? How can we learn from history to build a more just and compassionate world? These are the questions we must continue to ask ourselves.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to learn more about the Stolpersteine Project and the victims of Nazi persecution in your own community. Remember, history is not just something we read about in books. It's all around us, urging us to act with greater understanding and empathy.